So with FanFest right around the corner, we will soon know where we are going for the next big Final Fantasy XIV expansion. Now for me, this is the most fun time period before the next expansion, because we probably have all the information we are going to get before 8.0's big reveal at FanFest. And let me tell you, there are a lot of theories out there about where the next expansion is going to take place, and what's it going to be about. So I figured I would go through every possible theory I can think of / find about the next expansion. This is not a fully comprehensive list of every theory out there, so please feel free to post your theory in the comments. Also just know a lot of this video is speculation. I tried to base every location here on evidence, but some things might seem like a big stretch to you. I did try to order the list, number 1 being most likely to number 8 being least likely. And one last thing, spoilers all the way up to 7.4, basically all of Final Fantasy XIV. So if you don't want to be spoiled, leave now. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get on with the list. Alright, so number 1 might seem a bit general, but it is visiting different shards, or even different shards merging with the source. I would say the likelihood of 8.0 taking place on Reflection is pretty high. However, even if we don't travel to another shard, I think reflections will play a huge role in the story. Of the remaining reflections, we currently know the status of the 1st, 13th, and now the 9th. However, the 4th, 8th, and 11th reflections, as far as my research found, are complete unknowns. Through Halmarut's and Calix's conversations, we learned that because of the Warrior of Light, the 9th is doomed to die, although we have no idea why, when, or how as of right now. It is possible that we explore more of the 9th either in 7.5 or 8.0. Besides Treno, there could be other places on the 9th that are currently weathering the storm as well. Although it is possible we do explore more of the 9th, I still think it is more likely that we would instead travel to other unexplored reflections. Halmarut specifically states that every world shall tremble. This is perhaps due to what she calls the Great Withering to come. 8.0 is likely to center around this withering, and perhaps the Warrior of Light will have to save the last remaining unknown reflections. And as a result, we might travel to other reflections, because I can imagine the fissures Halmarut and Calix's use become much bigger in size, and other reflections start literally pouring into the source, or even merge with it, similar to how the Dome and Heritage Found worked in Dawntrail. However, let me not get too ahead of myself, because the reflections merging with the source can be involved with other location possibilities on my list. Now moving on to number 2, Blindfrost and Othard's North. Now this is a location that I think has a very strong possibility of appearing in 8.0. If we harken all the way back to Emixelk's speech at the end of Endwalker, he mentions a lot of locales for the Warrior of Light to eventually visit, and as of 7.4 we actually have visited a lot of them already. However, there's one we have yet to cross off our bucket list, Blindfrost. Going into 8.0, we're getting a ton of water and ice imagery. Firstly, we have a faction called the Winterers, who Halmarut and Calix refer to multiple times. Secondly, there is the New Year's note that was slipped under Yoshi P's door, which reads, "Our past astern, we scan the sea, in search of that which yet may be. Frail playthings of the restless tide, yet wind and wave shall be our guide." Astern, sea, restless tide, wind, and wave. These references are all nautical in nature. Also, the ending message we get at the end of 7.4 reads, "Whither blows fate's wandering will, for gray clouds presage winter's chill." Once again, blows, gray clouds, winter's chill, nautical and cold climate references. Now Blindfrost, as I'm sure you can tell where it is located on the map, it is supposedly an area that is very cold and is obviously surrounded by water. Who knows what dwells in these waters? Could it be the Winterers Halmarut and Calix are referring to? A lot of people are contemplating that 8.0 is going to have a pirate theme to it, which is very possible considering that MXO did mention that there are treasure islands beyond Blindfrost. However, if we go to Blindfrost, I would personally expect more of like a Viking or a Nordic themed expansion instead of pirates. I just think Vikings are more closely associated with colder ocean climates than pirates typically are. But but probably the one big issue with Blindfrost is the fact that the area is not very big. As you can see, it doesn't have a lot of landmass, so perhaps Blindfrost might just be one stop for the expansion, or we might find that another reflection merged with Blindfrost. There are many different ways the devs could use Blindfrost. Who knows, maybe the entirety of the expansion takes place in Blindfrost, similar to how Heavensward took place in only Dravania and Korthus. They could find a way to make it work somehow. Okay, now we are moving on to the rest of the list that I think is possible for 8.0, but is unlikely to happen in this expansion, at least in my opinion. Either way, it's time for number 3, the Void expansion. Now, this is kind of a long time coming. We have been learning more and more about the Void since A Realm Reborn patches. It's been especially featured in Shadowbringers role quests and Endwalker's patches. Actually, Elden Archive already did a fantastic video on a potential Void expansion and what it could look like. I would highly recommend checking out his video on the topic, especially if you want a more detailed explanation about what a Void-based expansion could look like. Although I personally believe that we will be getting a Void-centered expansion at some point in the more distant future. I still think we are at least 1 to 2 or maybe even 3 expansions away from that happening. I still think it is worthy of a mention here because it is definitely possible that 8.0 could be an expansion about the 13th. Now, there are a lot of things that could prevent an expansion entirely based on the 13th from happening. Like, for example, how there is very little landmass for people to physically stand on the 13th. In fact, the 13th actually kind of reminds me a lot of like the gas giant planets in our own solar system, just with some platforms on it. We have the entire basis of a Void expansion. It's really just up to the dev team to finally pull the trigger on a 13th related expansion. Plus, there are other ways I think the devs could incorporate the 13th into future expansions, like number 4, a 1st and 13th expansion. Now, within the Endwalker patches, Zero visits the 1st to collect some light to help the 13th recover, at least for our immediate purposes. And I think the writers, by doing this, they draw a clear distinction between the 1st and the 13th. One world has an abundance of light while the other has an abundance of darkness. And we have proven evidence that the light on the 1st can help heal the world of the 13th. Who's to say that the same could not happen in reverse? I have a suspicion that a future expansion could revolve around healing both shards and restoring them to how they were before their worlds were flooded with their respective element. Perhaps Halmarut's fissures could be used as a basis to pass the light from the 1st to the 13th, and vice versa, therefore balancing out both worlds. Now listen, I realize at this point I am mostly talking out of my ass here. I don't think that this is happening in 8.0. However, I do want to throw this out there as a possibility. And honestly, I haven't seen anybody else online have this theory, and I just wanted to talk about it so badly. Anyway, moving on. Number 5. The Burn. Now, that is a location you probably haven't heard of in a while. This is a theory that I found interesting and would like to share. It comes from this comment on the Final Fantasy XIV subreddit by Arity3125. Another thing that makes me lean towards Blindfrost is the Burn being directly connected to it via a bay. We were kind of interrupted from exploring the Burn previously due to Shadowbringers starting, but it is 100% an area of note, especially if the shards are collapsing back, as there's nowhere safer to have shards crash and merge together than a region lacking in ether. This theory I find fascinating, due to the fact that it makes a lot of sense. Why not have shards crash in an area lacking of ether? I would love to return to the Burn as well, because to me it was set up in Stormblood as one of the most fascinating places on the source. It is this barren, white desert due to the area's lack of ether, and the way that the game talked about the Burn made it sound like it is this incredibly dangerous area to live in, even without the monsters. In fact, it really kind of reminded me a lot of the Empty located on the 1st. Like Arity3125 said, if we look at the Burn's location, we can see that it is not that hard to access the Burn from Blindfrost, as far as we know. However, if the Burn does appear in 8.0, I would expect the entire expansion to not take place in it, since the area is mostly barren and we did have a dungeon that explored a lot of that area already. Number 6, Hingashi. Now this is an area I believe has a lot of potential for exploration. Anime Japan is basically what this place is, consisting of the Ruby Sea, the Glass Ocean, Koshu, Daitenzan, and Shishu. I'm sorry if I pronounce any of those names wrong. With all those places I just listed, we only really visited one area, and that's Kugane. And I guess we explored a bit more of Shishu in Mount Rakon. There is still so much unexplored land in Hingashi for our Warrior of Light. And I also saw this interview that Yoshi P mentioned that Hingashi is currently going through a civil war right now, which, pause, side note, can I just say how crazy it is that Yoshi P just casually mentions making the Warrior of Light time travel? Well, maybe it's not that crazy considering we did it in Endwalker. Well, anyway, this interview kind of makes me feel like we probably won't be going to Hingashi, because I imagine that it would be similar to a Stormblood expansion. As in, I think a lot of our objective would be political in nature. We would most likely go there with the goal to obtain peace. However, going to Hingashi would match the nautical vibe that all the hints have been giving off, but it doesn't give cold vibes either to me. Who's to say? Maybe we will visit and explore more of Hingashi on our adventure in 8.0. Now it's time for the much anticipated number 7, Meracydia. Maybe some of you guys were screaming Meracydia throughout the entirety of this video, but the reason Meracydia is so low on my list is because Yoshi P himself has said that Meracydia has already been decided on, specifically when we're going to visit it, and saying that it's going to be a long ways away. So for that very reason alone is why Meracydia is super low on my list. I highly doubt Yoshi P meant 8.0 when he said a while away, but I guess there is always still a chance, so I still included it. I am fully convinced that whenever we do travel to Meracydia, it is going to be our single location for an entire expansion, or it's very likely to be, specifically because of one thing: the Void. If you look at the lore of Meracydia, you would learn that it does have a history with the Void. So I would not be surprised if the Meracydia expansion mainly revolves around two things: dragons and the Void. I think the potential Void expansion is going to revolve around Meracydia as well. And so far, neither of those things have really been hinted at for 8.0. It really has been a long time coming for the Warrior of Light to finally appear in Meracydia, but I don't think it is very likely to happen for 8.0. Okay, so I have one last location for you guys, and since it is last on my list, I think it is the least likely to happen. Now, that doesn't mean it can't happen for 8.0, just unlikely. And that's Garlemald / Ilsabard. As I mentioned before, cold weather is a recurring theme in the hints for 8.0, which would make sense for Garlemald to be a potential location. And I mean, just look at the map on the source. There's one glaring thing covered in clouds, and that's Ilsabard. We also have not been inside of the city itself, Garlemald, nor much of the areas surrounding it. So once again, the fact that the map still has the place covered in clouds tells me that we still have much to explore in Ilsabard. Plus, I think having Ilsabard being a part of a potential Blindfrost expansion would make a lot of sense if the devs would fully commit to a cold climate expansion. But considering Alphino and Alize are now returning to Garlemald to help out the Garleans, I would imagine that we would not see the twins for a while, especially with that farewell we gave them. And to be honest, the real reason I ranked Garlemald and Ilsabard so low is because I just don't see us returning to Garlemald so soon after Endwalker. But who knows? I could be entirely wrong. Okay guys, that's the end of the list. Let me know what you guys think. Would you order my list differently? Are there places you feel like I missed? Feel free to tell me your 8.0 theories in the comments. I absolutely love reading about other people's crazy theories about upcoming expansions. And remember guys, almost anything can happen. I'll never forget before Dawntrail was announced, everybody was convinced that we were going to Meracydia. Then it turned out we were going to the New World. And like, nobody that I knew predicted the New World. I was really surprised, and I think the majority of the community was surprised as well. So I think it is extremely unwise to rule out anything for upcoming expansions at this point. But anyways, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe for more Final Fantasy XIV commentary, analysis, and discussion videos. This has been Argon, and I'll see you guys in the next video.